Kathy and know of the extraordinary work and actions that she's been involved with for many, many years. Kathy, it's really a pleasure to have you at our meeting tonight. I could talk about all of the different programs and parts of the world that you've been to during times of war, as well as times of peace, to stop the wars and to stop the violence and stop the fighting. And thank you also to Nick Modern, who's working with you on the Merchants of Death program, which is extraordinary. And I know you're here tonight to talk with us about it and maybe talk about some of your experiences having influenced you in working on this program, the anti-drone program, which is trying to stop some of the terrible destruction against people, and I would say all living things. So thank you for your wonderful work and activism, and it's an honor to have you at our chapter meeting tonight.
Oh, well, thank you, Susan, and I'm certainly glad to see everybody that's here. And I just want you to know that anytime I've been on a walk and Vets for Peace are waving the flag, or I've been at a vigil and Vets for Peace are stalwartly there, or I've been at your very brainy conventions, I've always just felt so pleased to be linked up with you and to behold the really wonderful things that are being done. Sherry is on the call, and she and I both have had experience being hosted by youngsters with we're not supposed to say their name now because they're so endangered under the current regime, but they were a hardy group of stalwarts who really believed that you could overcome ethnic differences and share resources and assert yourself against even the, United States military and people that could be pretty fearsome within their own warlords in their own country. And the thing that they always would say for 10 years was, blood doesn't wash away blood. And I'll just repeat that. Blood doesn't wash away blood. And now with, just rivers of blood being shed in multiple wars, and those wars being fomented by the weapon manufacturers who benefit so handsomely from the war making. It seems that there has to be almost like a quantum leap forward in terms of seeking accountability. And certainly the governments are accountable. But it's been so glaringly clear that the people who are sort of running to the bank with their portfolios stuffed and their coffers bulging, the people who have made billions of dollars on war after war after war, are the people in major manufacturing companies. And we, particularly Nick and Brad Wolf and Sally Al-Ghazali and I, have decided to focus on 4 of them: Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Atomics, in what we're calling the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal that will be held in November of this year, beginning on November 10th. And it's been a gift to work with Nick. I think sometimes we talk with each other more than anyone else as we have tried to get this campaign moving. And now it really is moving in a lot of good different directions. All of the material that's being assembled will be presented as an online presentation. And we are especially wanting to emphasize the people who have been the victims of the wars since 9/11. And it's their testimony that often isn't heard and should be heard, and we think can be so very compelling and convincing. And you might ask, well, what are you going to charge these merchants of death with? And certainly war crimes, crimes against humanity, but also the idea of aiding and abetting, and in a way, bribery and theft, because they've taken the resources so desperately needed. I mean, when we ask ourselves, what would really defend us? Because that's what these big corporate heads always say. Well, you know, the United States wants to be defended, and we're just doing what the United States government asks us to do. We just make the stuff. I don't think that works, because certainly what would really defend us now in this country at this time would be collaboration with other countries so that we can survive ecological collapse. It would be finding ways to survive new pandemics, again, through collaboration, not ongoing enmity and building up this false notion that everybody in the world that happens to live in a place where we would like to exercise control in the United States has to become an enemy. And then certainly with the possibility of nuclear weapon proliferation, we would all be defended if the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons were to be ratified in this country. So do these corporations act knowingly? Well, I can remember that I was part of a group of people who went with the biggest containers of red popsicle dye we could possibly get. And we went down to Boeing and we dumped that red dye into the river and dyed the river red so that we could say to Boeing, you're causing rivers of blood. And I remember being in a courtroom when our friends had gone in and done a sit-in in Boeing's lobby to say during the buildup to the war against Iraq, that this is going to cause terrible bloodshed. I remember standing outside of Boeing just 3 years ago, reading the names of people who had been killed in Gaza in horrendous, horrific attacks using airships constructed by Boeing. Boeing knows what it is doing. Raytheon's got a big headquarters in DC. Also, they've got a facility in Massachusetts, and in Boston, people have been holding actions to condemn Raytheon again and again and again. They do act knowingly. But when they get coverage in the media or when they're doing their own webinars, they will say almost like choir boys, like, you know, you expect to see them in the pulpit in the local faith-based place. Well, of course, you know, we are hiring people with diversity in mind. We're providing jobs for people who might not otherwise get that leg up. We're helping young people with STEM education. They greenwash themselves. The hypocrisy is utterly overwhelming. And then, you know, I think in New York, many of you would remember going to Lockheed Martin with blue backpacks. And on each backpack was the name of a child on a bus on a school field trip in Yemen. And it was Lockheed Martin parts that were found. Those of you who might have read Jeffrey Stern's remarkable reporting in a New York Times Magazine cover story about the journey of an American Raytheon-made bomb from Arizona to a tiny village in Yemen called Ahad. And Priyanka Motaparthi went over to Yemen and she kind of stumbled through the craters that were caused by the multiple bombings of that tiny village, and she picked up a bomb part and it was traceable to Lockheed Martin. Well, I can't believe that some of those Lockheed Martin execs don't at times read the New York Times Magazine. Yes, they know. Yes, they should be held accountable. And yes, it's up to us to try to figure out new and creative and nonviolent ways to educate the public and to do outreach and hold them accountable. So we invite you in any capacity that you would want to engage in, whether it's to give advice or assist with research or encourage further outreach in your communities or your universities or your faith-based groups. We have some months now leading up to the November tribunal, and we'll have an action every month. We just had one yesterday that Brad Wolf and Nick planned, and it went quite well. It had the theme, Melt Your Cold, Cold Heart. It's clear that there was plenty of surveillance in advance of that action. Brad Wolf was coming up the escalator steps and the police pointed at him and said, that's him. And they knew every place he was going to go in Washington, D.C. that day, even though it hadn't been all printed in a press release. So they kind of have their eye on us. We have our eye on them. And we really must not look away from the terrible damage being done. And you know, when I talk about defense, it's not even a word I like to use that much, because I think our best defense is in extending the hand of friendship. That's where we find social security. But I do want to say that the bombings, the torture, the displacement, the bereavement, the maiming, the orphaning of so many people in other parts of the world has created a feeling of resentment toward the United States. And it's possible that will grow, particularly if we push Russia and China closer together in resistance to the United States' insistence upon being the world's #1 hegemon. So we have a lot of work to do. I know that we catch courage from one another. It's a gift to be with all of you, and I'll be happy to hear from Nick and any questions you might have.
Nick, did you want to add to Kathy's statement?
Oh, I would just want to note that that Sewell and Granny Peace Brigade and I think some members of Veterans for Peace participated in the challenge to Lockheed Martin in Manhattan yesterday. And one of the things that was very interesting and we hadn't done before is that we had a document there, basically I guess they call it a pseudo-legal document, a people's, you know, I guess you'd say a request that these corporations do answer the subpoena that was sent to them in November. And all the people who were at the protest signed the petition, or well, it is a petition now, and that's going to be on our website. So people can go on merchantsofdeath.org and sign this basically order to comply with the subpoena. And I think as we spread that, we're going to try to do that on Instagram. I'm going to talk to somebody about that tomorrow. I think we'll get a lot of signatures, but if everybody here could go on to the merchantsofdeath.org, I think that that's posted now, and if it's not, it probably will be tomorrow or the next day. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I also mention that March 1st in New York, there will be an action to condemn the ongoing blockade of Yemen and the bombing of Yemen. And, you know, we should pay attention to these double standards. We have, you know, 24/7 full page coverage day after day of the war in Ukraine. Never is there a mention of the war going on against people in Yemen who've meant us no harm, and the United States continues to arm Saudi Arabia. So that kind of double standard is something that's not lost on people in other parts of the world.
Thank you. Are there questions for Kathy? It's very quiet tonight. Tarek. We can't hear you.
Tarek, you're muted.
Hey, sorry. So Kathy, I don't have a question. I just want to thank you so much for everything that you do and the way you speak, which is so much directly from your heart without any artifice or any extra stuff added on, you know. And it's just terrific. You're an inspiration to so many. And I deeply appreciate that ever since I first met you.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
Thank you. So thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Michael Brackney.
I'm going to echo what Tarek just said. Even though I've never met you, Kathy, and my Zoom is not, my video is not working, or maybe it'll work for a moment. We'll see. Anyway, I and Derek, who's also on this call, are from San Diego, and we participated in a rally against General Atomics yesterday, against
Wonderful.
drones, and we read all the points in the accusation, and we'll all be signing the petition too. And I want your comment on a matter of concern to me. The name of the effort, Melt Your Cold, Cold Heart, I think was pretty close to what it was. And I took rather grave exception to that, because I thought it was attacking the people personally rather than actually naming what we're accusing them of. I thought it was taking the heat of personalizing it.
Well, Michael, I wish I'd had this conversation with you earlier. That was my idea. There's an old song, Melt Your Cold, Cold Heart, and I just thought for Valentine's Day, it might be good to sort of suggest that there's a sort of a frozenness in the approach to reckoning with what we all have to hold ourselves accountable for. But I agree with you. I don't think a way forward is to shame an individual or take the emphasis away from the collective, the corporate nature. And you know, I want to say I hold myself accountable too. I'm never acquitted. I'm living pretty gosh darn well. You know, I've been able to make it to my 70th year in life and suffered almost never. And not very many people on the planet can say that. So I think we do have to hold ourselves accountable. But yeah, I'm sorry that offended you. And if we had thought about it further, we might certainly not have chosen that. I think in New York, they didn't use that. They said something more like unlock your hearts in front of Lockheed Martin.
I really appreciate your understanding my concern, because your reframing of it does take away the personal jab. I mean, we're not trying to get at them as people. We're trying to clarify how awful their actions are. That's what we're objecting to. And your reframing was, I thought it was great. It didn't, you found a way of using heart without making it a personal accusation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Hostetter.
Oh, Doug. Doug, you're muted.
Sorry. Hi, Kathy. It's good to see you again. The big issue I see is the relationship between the weapons manufacturing industry and the way in which our Congress gets elected. The enormous amounts of money that is used to elect people, and the way in which the weapons industry have been very careful to scatter their plants all across the country in every congressional district. How do we break the link between money for politicians and the industry of death?
Thank you, Doug. You know, that idea of a revolving door comes to mind, doesn't it? It just goes around and around. And it's true in other parts of the world as well. Doug, I was thinking about the time when you went to Afghanistan, and I think the war had just begun. Am I right? And you went to deliver blankets. I remember you were crossing bridges that weren't particularly safe, and you were with Gene Stoltzfus. And in fact, the two of you had invited me to go. And after I hung up, I never go into hysterics. And I did that night. I wept hysterically. not being able to go with you, but I think I was taking care of my dad and trying to make sure voices didn't go kaput. But I want to say that what you did, the drama of that action, has a legacy, and it's that we have to draw from, I think, to try to sort of run interference. What can we bring to the table? We don't have, big amounts of money to offer people if they'd like to please see things our way. But I think that we can offer the stories that tell about what we did. And I certainly invite you, Doug, to consider giving testimony with us in this Emergence of Death War Crimes Tribunal.
Well, thanks. I would be pleased to do that. I mean, I did go directly as the Americans were beginning their war. I thought that the peace churches should provide an alternative vision at the time when the poorest country in Asia was being bombed by the most wealthy country in the world. And what the Afghans really needed was food and blankets and medicines. And so I actually went with Soraya Sadid, a fabulous American woman who had a small organization called Help the Afghan Children. And the thing that amazed me going into northern Afghanistan as American bombers were bombing only a few kilometers south of us was that the Afghans welcomed us as Americans, bringing food, bringing medicine, bringing blankets. And they looked at me and they said, we always thought Americans were our friends. Why is your country bombing our country? During the Soviet occupation, we thought the Americans were there for us, trying to help us. And here you are bombing us. And I had a very hard time trying to explain to them that, some radical Muslims living in their country had destroyed a building that was about a half a kilometer tall in New York City and killed about 3,000 people. This was in Takhar province, where the tallest building was 2 stories high. So it was a little hard for them to understand, but they welcomed us even while our country was bombing their country. And if the Americans only understood that if we were willing to give people the things that they really need, we would have friends and allies around the world. It's much, much more powerful than the weapons that we're wasting our money on, and much cheaper to provide. We took in, well, I don't know, remember, something like $60,000 worth of food that we bought in Tajikistan. And I don't remember, but we were able to provide something like 7,000 families 1 month's worth of rice, sugar, and cooking oil in the exact proportions that you need for Afghan flatbread for $60,000. And when you think of how much money we waste on the weapons, it is obscene.
Thank you, Doug.
Are there other comments or questions for Kathy? Need to let us know now. Ellen, do you see any hands?
Nick.
Nick. Go ahead, Nick. And Nick was highlighted.
I just wanted to add that we're going to be making recommendations to the public and to the tribunal at the end of the series of hearings that will start in November. And one of them is very likely to be that trading in stock for weapons makers should be made illegal, as should campaign contributions. So is that far away, politically? Well, it might be, but it might be something that people could begin to organize behind, because there are other things too, like medicines, for example, where there shouldn't be lobbying or campaign contributions permitted. So, and I think this has been discussed to some degree before, but the outrageous accumulation of wealth and monopoly power of these companies may be sufficient at this point to cause people to think more seriously about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Other questions, comments? Oh my goodness. Is that it, folks? Because
Maybe we can let Kathy
yes.
get away from her computer. We really appreciate that you stuck it out.
Oh, thank you. It was great to be with all of you, and maybe just close with Albert Camus'
wait.
There
words.
is another, right, is that Tom Gogan has a question, and then we'll let you go, Kathy.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, I apologize for being on a little late, so I missed much of Kathy Kelly's presentation. I was with you, not as an arrestee, but I was with you in Syracuse. What is that, 10 or 12 years ago?
Oh, yeah. The diary.
I think that's possibly the only time I've physically been in your presence. That was quite an amazing action. My question is regarding the tribunal. What are the next steps that will be happening, or is that not really on topic?
Oh, no, very much on topic. Thank you, Tom. We have a script that Nick Mautern has written, and it takes us through each of the phases of the testimony, and it indicates quite clearly what hasn't yet been researched. And there's hundreds of hours, really, of research that we need to collectively engage in. And Nick has been bringing in some really talented student researchers. They're just great. And there are several writers that are interested to keep following up with this. But if you would like to become involved in the research and then linking up, as we get a narrative describing a particular atrocity, then we also need to know that weapons from one of these 4 companies were being used and what kind of weapons. And so that's the kind of testimony we need to investigate. And a lot of it is in public record. I had said to Sherry Warren one day, I can't find my own notes about all of the different military companies involved in bombing Gaza. And that afternoon, she sent me a list. So we can find those sorts of materials, but we really need a disciplined path forward. So people are very welcome to join us. And we will do an action every month. I know that we're planning an action to coincide with Earth Day in April. And I just also want to mention that if anybody wants to go out to Holloman Air Force Base in April, they are planning from April 15th to the 22nd Earth Day to have a time of activism out there to protest that base using drone weapons warfare.
Thank you.
So Albert Camus, it's a formidable gamble that words are stronger than weapons. Let's take that gamble. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good night. Have a
Enjoy your
wonderful
dinner.
Thanks.
Our next guest speaker is William Neuheisel, who is a human rights and civil liberties advocate with the Whistleblower and Source Protection Program at Expose Facts. Thank you so much, William, for joining us tonight. And I imagine some of the questions we'll have will be about Daniel Hale, how he's doing and what is happening with him. So welcome to our meeting.
Thank you so much. Just really grateful to be here again with you all. Grateful for your support, humbled to be here. Just, many of you have been following your work for so long now and have inspired me and motivated me and much of my work since I was at a formative age. So thank you again. wish I had more of an update at the moment. Unfortunately, it's been a little bit of a interregnum in the campaign. It was a bit of a difficult fall. We found out that Daniel was rejected in his application to the kind of treatment program that the judge recommended him for at sentencing. Some of you who may have been following this closely may remember that when Daniel was sentenced, the judge actually recommended him for a minimum security facility in the Bureau of Prisons, actually a medical facility if possible, where he could get the kind of treatment for PTSD and moral injury, and help him along with some substance recovery issues. Unfortunately, the Bureau of Prisons took their basically unaccountable power to place him within the CMU, the Communications Management Unit, which is sometimes referred to as Guantanamo North, one of two units that are referred to as such, one being in Illinois, the other being in Indiana. Daniel is in Illinois. And it's been a difficult time there because well, technically he is not in solitary confinement. He is within a unit that is separated out from the general population at that unit in Marion, Illinois. And what that means is he's not isolated from other incarcerated people in the same way that he would be in solitary, but he is effectively more heavily isolated from the outside world than he would otherwise be in a federal facility. And the other implication is that when he seeks treatment, even just basic medical treatment can be difficult sometimes, because even for him to go see the doctor in the facility, they have to clear that out because it's shared between the CMU and the general population, the rest of the facility. And so because they see that as a security risk under their sort of Kafkaesque logic, they have to clear out the rest of the patients in the medical facility so that Daniel is in there alone when he seeks treatment, because there can't be any communication, to anyone who's not authorized. So in the fall, he had applied to be transferred to a different facility where he would be able to seek the kinds of programs that he is not able to get in the CMU that the judge had recommended him for and recognized the need for, but he was rejected. And that was difficult because Daniel had been, I think, really psychologically, really placing a lot of hope on that, and was a big letdown for him. And it was frustrating too, just, again, it goes back to the legal sort of Kafkaesque black hole that it is the CMU that was created after 9/11, and in the dark years of the Bush administration. The counterterrorism unit that monitors all of his communications, in fact, listens live to our calls. The counterterrorism unit gets a veto over such applications to these kind of programs. And they, in fact, exercise that veto. And there are a few reasons. They don't actually tell you why they're rejecting it, but there are a few reasons. One of those reasons is simply the nature of the conviction itself, meaning that it's entirely possible. In fact, I think it's likely that he never had a chance to begin with, because they were always going to say, well, he's a security threat because this was an Espionage Act conviction. This was a communications-based crime. Therefore, we can't allow him to communicate freely. And so, it's just, again, this sort of heartbreaking lack of due process and just unaccountable power that they have to retaliate against him. So he's been dealing with that since the fall. And in November and December, we had a window where we made a big push for commutation. Daniel had applied formally and asked the Biden administration to commute his sentence. The difference between commutation and pardon being the commutation, they see it as sort of a two-step process. Commutation is the one that they want you to apply for while you're actually in prison. It's what gets you out, but it doesn't clear away the conviction in the same way that a pardon does. It doesn't restore the civil rights in the same way that a pardon does. But we felt that there was a window there to ask for commutation. We made a big push for that, and we got a lot of good support in the weeks in November and December. It was a very short window, but we made a big push, and we brought on good support. We got good messages from Stephen Donziger has come on as a supporter of Daniel. He was the lawyer. Some of you may recognize the name. He was the environmental lawyer who took on Chevron in Latin America and was himself retaliated against for his work there and his success in fighting for environmental justice against those companies. And so Stephen Donziger has come on as a big vocal supporter of Daniel. We had messages from Daniel Ellsberg and Noam Chomsky as well, and from Ilhan Omar, a sitting member of Congress from Minnesota. Unfortunately, we didn't get the traction we had hoped, but we knew it was a long shot, but we knew that was our window. At this point, I'm sorry to say that I think, our thinking is that the hopes for commutation, while it was always a long shot, but now we think it's probably vanishing in terms of actually commuting the sentence and getting him out early. So I think we'll be shifting more. I know personally, I will be shifting more efforts back to this to ask for the pardon, laying the groundwork for politically for the pardon at some point in the future, hopefully. We're sort of at an interim after making that big push. I think we're not at the point right now where we're doing a coordinated action right now. But we are in a phase where we're trying to support Daniel, given the sort of administrative issues he's facing, getting services within the prison. And so just a quick update on Daniel's condition. He is recovering from his fourth bout of COVID. He just had again recently. It just goes around in prison back and forth, as some of you may be aware. He has been focusing a lot on just reading a lot of books. He's been getting a ton of books. We had to put out an update to actually ask people to pause sending books for the time being, because he had the maximum amount they would allow him in his cell. So we're quite grateful for that. And he's got a lot of good reading material. He's been focusing on studying Spanish and Chinese, I believe Mandarin Chinese. He's got a real aptitude for languages, so he's got a lot of interest around that. And he's been able to watch some television programming in the facility there. He gets access to Democracy Now! And he's been watching a lot of Jeopardy to keep his mind sharp there. What else? I guess I'll pause there and open up for questions in case anything I didn't cover.
Thank you. Questions?
Susan, I just want to draw people's attention to the chat where, thank you, Anthony, for reminding me about this, that there's a link to Chris Brandt, who did a reading of Daniel's incredible letter to the judge before sentencing. And so people should grab that link and go watch that. It's really powerful. So thank you, Anthony. And now I see Nick has a hand up, and then Rachel.
And then Rachel, sure.
Hi, William. I wanted to ask, would it be advisable or helpful for Veterans for Peace to organize a march from St. Louis to Marion, Illinois, where the prison is, to draw attention to the situation? It seems really that they're either trying to kill him or drive him insane. And I know that this idea of a march has been discussed before, and it didn't seem to be that popular with some of his legal team. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts about that, because I do know that there are some people who would be willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, I think we'd have to talk more about that. Right now, there are some processes going on that I can't speak to, again, in terms of these issues he's having getting services. And so he's just very vulnerable right now, and we don't have a lot of leverage over that. We're trying to thread a couple of needles right now, and so I can't say much, but what I can say is that we're trying to walk a very fine line between raising these issues and not drawing more retaliation on him during these vulnerable times. So I think that is the idea of the march is something that we would need to return to again and have consensus on with his core support team also. And we should follow up separately on that.
I just saw that Susan got called away, so I'm jumping in here. So Rachel.
Yes, on behalf of my colleagues in Japan, I would like to express our sincere gratitude for your support last year when we tried to make a theater play out of his letter to Judge O'Grady. Prior to that, I've sent him a letter. Were you able to find out if he received a letter or not? I asked him his permission to make a theater play.
Unfortunately, I was not. And that's one of the issues we're having is the communications, our bandwidth that we get with him is quite limited. Even we have difficulty actually getting through to him from time to time. And our time with him has been quite limited. And even I'm still not approved to actually get on a video call with him. So I still have to do snail with him. And I'm only able to get on legal calls with him when we're able to do that. But that is only, has to be pertaining to active legal matters. So that's one of the major issues that we've faced in terms of coordinating actions and campaigns is that the reality is that we haven't been able to communicate with Daniel a lot of his questions, and we've had to sort of feel our way through it and do the best we can with that. So I know that he really feels bad that he hasn't been able to receive and write back to everyone who's written to him. And it's an ongoing real sore spot for all of us.
Thank you. I would like to share what's going on over there about this theater play. So far, I think they played 4 or 5 times at the very small theaters, and the reaction from audience is amazing. 2 young men mastered with their own versions of Danielle Hale, 2 different interpretations from the same script, and many audience got into tears, and they were very grateful to learn the reality of drone attacks. And aside from theater play, we made a booklet. It became a beautiful literature as a kind of a war poetry kind of result, and we translated both his letter to Judge O'Grady as well as his testimony right before he was brought to the jail. And this booklet has been given to anyone who donate money for Danielle Hale. So we are collecting money for him in Japan, and hopefully we can collect, I don't know how much it's going to be, but we're trying to get ready to support him financially a little bit. Or once he is out of jail, maybe we can invite him to Japan for speaking tour or something like that. But anyway, there are a lot of big Danielle Hale fans generating in Japan. Whether we can perform over here or not, it's up to air. I'm supposed to have a meeting with our steering committee members this weekend about what we're going to do further on. So please keep in touch, and we sincerely appreciate your support, and we'd like to keep raising awareness of the drone operation, because it is not only him, but also the potential future for self-defense forces of Japan, which is totally illegal. The Constitution of Japan renounces any type of forces for outward forces. They're supposed to be only self-defense, but they are somehow changed the interpretation of the pacifist constitution. So now they are more than ready to attack anyone along with the United States. So our concern is maybe self-defense forces will be used like Ukrainian force, so it's a very crucial moment. And in this political climate, to raise awareness of Daniel Hale and his pacifist will is very important. So we're going to keep doing it. And I hope, he can be coming out of the jail a lot sooner than 45 months. Thank you.
And I just want to note, as Anthony pointed out to me, that Rachel did the translation of that letter into Japanese. So thank you,
Thank
Rachel,
you.
woman of many talents.
Oh, well, thank you. But I made a translation team who are much more talented in Japanese literature. So the final result is much more sophisticated than my rough translation.
Thank you.
And she's modest.
Fantastic.
Yes. And thank you, Rachel, for the amazing, incredible work that you're doing. Thank you.
And I would encourage you, please keep writing to Daniel, even if you don't hear back. He may not be able to respond, but it's the biggest ask we have right now is to keep writing to him. Like I said, it's been a difficult stretch for him these past few months, and the communications have been difficult. So that's really the biggest thing we have is keep letting him know that this is happening and just keep writing, keep trying. And again, he's been sending out his apologies again over and over again that he can't write back to everyone. He doesn't get all of his mail, but he really does appreciate it and take it to heart.
Thank you.
Terrific. And I just have a quick question. So I guess we should put out a notice in National Veterans for Peace newsletter to request people to keep writing to him.
That'd be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. Have you guys figured out like who, put the pressure on to have him put in the CMU? And was it the Air Force or, was it one of the national security operations or I'm sure that probably, you don't know, but that's okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that has been bothering me also quite a lot. The answer is we really don't know, and it's really one of the terrifying things. It's this black box, and as Rachel was saying, she's asking how can they just change the Constitution and ignore it? And it's just these things that you think are supposed to be so solid and almost written in stone, are just so easily just waved away, and you don't know where it comes from. It could be that it came from someone at DOJ or the intel agencies to retaliate against him. But honestly, what's almost a scare to me is that I think there's a high likelihood that it was simply sort of like a stupid literalism, just the logic that has been baked into the system itself that says, oh, this was a communications-based crime, therefore it's communications management unit, so he's a threat. And it's just that sort of like that stupid literalism almost of someone who just, the functionary just doing their job in the BOP, because the Bureau of Prisons has just this unaccountable power, even though the judge recommended in the sentencing. It's merely a recommendation for them. They have, the legal process that it would take for us to challenge that determination would take longer than Daniel's prison term to even get a hearing. It's really quite disturbing in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Rachel, did you have another comment?
So, William, when I checked your firm's website, there are many more people who are incarcerated with the similar charges as Daniel Hale, right? In case of Daniel Hale, we understand that in his case, it's pretty clear that he shouldn't be in jail. What about other people? Were they very similar to Daniel Hale's cases?
It's been an escalating trend. We saw that in the case of, for example, John Kiriakou or Jeffrey Sterling, they were sort of like, there were some differences because like John Kiriakou was a little bit higher in the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And so part of it is the different spanks for different ranks. John got the benefit of, John got the benefit of going to a lower security facility. But as these cases came more and more, and you started to see the lower level employees like Reality Winner and Daniel Hale, and to some extent Terry Albury, those folks started getting the harsher sentences and the harsher treatment in the prison that we've seen. This Daniel is the first person in an Espionage Act case, an elite case, to be put in a CMU. And so it's just been this sort of one-way ratchet that just keeps going up and up and up. The sentences keep getting longer. The conditions keep getting worse.
Unbelievable. I mean, the land of free is not. It's very, very totalitarian country we live in. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
it really has been, people sometimes, people sometimes like to sort of make fun of the idea of a slippery slope, but it seems to have been, every time they get one of these prosecutions, it really just empowers the most sort of hawkish, authoritarian voices in the bureaucracy. There are people who push back against this. We've seen evidence of that, but those people tend to get sort of shoved aside every time one of these comes out, and it just empowers the most aggressive persecution every time it happens. And that's, it's why we fear, and we've been talking a lot about how this is a really, harbinger for the Assange case. I mean, it's just going to be, again, it's that ratchet just going one way again.
Susan, I want to make sure you see Michael has a hand up. I
Right.
can't spotlight him.
Right. Michael Brackney, go ahead.
Thank you, Susan. William, thank you very much for your work. Here's my personal voice letter to you of thanks, and no reply necessary.
Thank you.
Would you please put Daniel's address in the chat for us?
What I'll do is, could I provide the link with the address and the instructions there? Because there are a few instructions that people need to follow there.
Sure.
If I could provide that real quick.
Sure. That's one question.
Great.
And the other question is, didn't you mention Ilhan Omar as a supporter?
I did, yeah. She wrote a letter to President Biden urging him to pardon Daniel, and she's been quite vocal and quite strong in that statement.
I see. Is anyone else joining her? And is there any way in which we can encourage more people to join her? Would that be useful at this point?
Yeah, if you have any, we've been urging people to write their Congress members, urging them to join on to that letter that Representative Omar sent, to join on to that call, to help provide the political cover, that if there is any opportunity to issue that pardon or commutation, that there is some political cover out there that could happen.
Thank you.
And not just members of Congress, but anyone with any following, who you think might be potential supporter of Daniel Hale, any celebrity voices, any bigger platforms we can get on. I think just to keep his name out there.
I know Roots Action is doing their best.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Nick, you had a question.
Yes, I wonder how many more months does Daniel have to serve if he doesn't get any relief from his sentence?
He's currently scheduled, I think, so it's, the current release date would be July of 2024, but it may not be that long. He could be released early into a halfway house before that. So it's, but I think that would be the latest date he would be released is July, I think July 4th or 5th, 2024.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? No more questions. Just a quick comment from right from the 60s, from those folks who refused orders to go to Vietnam and refused military orders. and were sent to Fort Leavenworth. The prison terms were around 3, 4, 5, 6 years, but they were not primarily in isolation, and they were able to gather together and talk and actually support each other. This is an enormous change and indicative of what's going on in the United States today that we all need to have more conversations about. You go out and you protest and you're in the military. It's not just this court-martial trial and then you go someplace for a couple of years. And it seems to me Daniel is just one example of many others. And it's a threat to all of us who are out in the streets and protesting and taking actions. And just for everybody, it even more of a reason why we need to support Daniel Hale and the others and take this on as a major project. We have a responsibility to support those who are going out there for us.
Thank you for saying that. Exactly. Daniel will be the first to tell you, he has actually one of the shorter sentences of all the people he's in there with. It's a black hole of illegality. It's really shocking. It's an erosion of as bad as things have always been. It's just another step. And he would be the first to say there's, as you say, it's protesters. It's been used against environmental activists in a few cases, and there's a lot of racial and religious profiling that's been going on unnoticed, and we need to talk about that and the threat to all of our rights.
Thank you. So a reminder to all of us. Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you again.
I think it's a really important another wake-up call for us, right? As this country, government, military are destroying the earth, those people protesting it are put away. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's Michael has a hand up
Yes,
again.
Michael, did you want to say something? Michael Brackney?
I'm trying to unmute.
Okay.
You were unmuted and now you're muted again.
Oh, there we go. There we go. William, could you just take us take a moment to update us on the status of Chelsea Manning? Is she still in prison?
No. In fact, so Chelsea was released. Her sentence was commuted on the towards the very end of the Obama administration. He issued a commutation, and she was imprisoned for several months again under the aegis of a grand jury investigation, which is widely believed to be connected to the Assange prosecution. So she was she was jailed for a number of months because of her refusal to cooperate with that grand jury investigation.
Exactly. That was the last that I heard. So why was she released from that, or when?
Well, she had already served, I believe it was 7.5 years of that sentence. And, her conditions and her treatment were in most ways even far worse than what Daniel has experienced and what really anyone has experienced under these prosecutions. I mean, that's, she was on the military side, so there's some differences in that. And, that court of justice is a little harsher, but yeah, no, she's had by far the harshest time of anyone, and there was enough attention around that I think it just finally got to Obama on a personal level. But she had a great book that came out this year. I just saw her, got to shake her hand in person and see her. She's finally seems to be doing well and thriving. She was on a book tour. She's finally able to tell her own story for herself for the first time, and all this, she was silenced for so long, and now she's able to tell that. And it's really an incredible book. Highly recommend to read that.
Title?
It's called readme.text.
And on what basis was she released? Because she refused to testify. as supposedly required, I was afraid they were going to keep her in perpetuity.
Yeah, same. I mean, I thought they were not going to let that poor soul ever be free and peace ever again. But you know, the principle is that it's not supposed to. They're supposed to be able to imprison you to coerce you to testify.
Right.
But if it becomes clear that you are not partial to being coerced, it's not supposed to be punitive. And so at that point, they're not supposed to be able to continue to imprison you. So that is, I think, considered by all of us who are watching that to be itself an egregious abuse of the grand jury process. The length of time at which they imprisoned her and the fines that they issued to her.
Right. So is there now a standard period that they take to assess whether or not she will comply? Or is that completely?
It's up to the judge. It's just this, as far as I understand, it's unaccountable discretion of the judge.
Okay. Thanks very much, William.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, folks, I'm going to change the agenda around. I think Anthony was going to be talking about the Golden Rule's visit to New York.